In letter number 9, we come to the second part of the law of undulation. In the previous letter, Screwtape was directing Wormwood, first of all, what the law of undulation was and how God makes use of this law of undulation. Now he's going to explain how do we as devils make use of this law of undulation. Remember, the law of undulation is that in all human activities there are peaks and there are troughs. There are points of high energy, high focus, and then there are low points, troughs, where the energy is down, where the enthusiasm is down. There may even be just a total lack of motivation, or even any kind of feeling of pleasure or enjoyment. Now, this is something that's not just true of the spiritual life. It's true of every aspect of human life, because, as Screwtape points out, we as human beings are amphibians. We are in a spiritual world, but we're also in a material world. We are soul, but we are body. And the spiritual part of it, which allows us to ascend to God and allows us to be open to so many things, is united with a body that gets tired, that has points of energy and enthusiasm, but also has points of simply being low and less energetic, less enthusiastic, less motivated. So what is it that the devils recommend? What is it that Screwtape recommends to Wormwood in terms of how to attack this guy once he's in a trough? This is a good time, Screwtape says, to push some form of sensual temptation. And when you push sensual temptation when the guy is at peak, this can a lot of times be disappointing, because it can turn into just sort of merriment, happiness, things that don't really benefit the devils at all. One thing here which it's important to recognize, and Lewis spends some time on it in Screwtape's explanation, is that pleasure is something that is not a tool of the devil or somehow the devil's invention. Whenever you have a pleasure in its normal, natural form, it's something that's good and it's something that comes from God. So many times we can look at pleasure and merely think of pleasure in its bad form or its perverted form. But that's because what the devil has done, or what we have done, is take something that God has given us and twisted it. So that we eat and we enjoy food is healthy. That we eat too much, or that we're gluttons, that is something that we've taken of God's and perverted. That we're attracted to the opposite sex, that a man loves a woman, that's something that is healthy, that's normal and natural. That somehow he wants to use and exploit her. That's taking something that God has given and now twisting it, perverting it. Screwtape says we cannot invent pleasures. All we can do is take what God has given and ruin them. And you know what? Why should we allow these creatures to have pleasures anyway? The way that Screwtape puts it is particularly striking. To be able to take a man's soul and not give him any pleasure in return, to give him an increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. That's the real goal. That style, to take from a man everything and give him nothing in return. That's the very thing that delights our Father below us, that delights the devil's heart. So you have to recognize here that pleasure is something that is God's invention, and what the devil is doing is perverting it to serve his own ends. But it's a powerful testimony that Lewis has, and we'll see this throughout the letters, of the ways in which God has given us things that the devils try to manipulate, but finally speaking, they do not control, and they are not the authors of. Think about the difference between a man who's approaching alcohol if he's at a wedding, or if he's just gotten a raise. This is something that, even if he drinks too much, it's not necessarily going to make him an alcoholic. Contrast that to a guy who's now going to a bar after he's been laid off, or after his wife has left him. He's going to be seeking alcohol now as a painkiller, as an escape. And that's the kind of thing that is useful for devils. In other words, you want to push sensual temptations when people are at a low point. They're not approaching it in the same way as they do when they're at peak. Love and sensual temptations. If the guy's at peak, Screwtape says, a lot of times this can turn into romantic love of some kind, even marriage. That's not something that's going to be helpful from that point of view. But if you want to corrupt the patient, having him seek sensual temptations, having him seek a woman when he's down, when he's empty, this is the kind of thing that is going to allow his sensual expression or his sensual desires to be perverted, to be objectifying, exploitative, all the things that are sort of unhealthy in the way that human beings carry out sexuality. As well as pushing sensual temptations on him, you want to try to attack his faith life directly. So, first of all, lead him away. Don't let him be aware of the fact that there is a law of undulation. It's strange, but there are many people who, when they think about ups and downs, they don't think of a faith life as having ups and downs. They think somehow that that's exempted from the other areas of their life. But just as your professional life, your relationship life, your family life, that those are areas that have ups and downs, so also is it the case that your faith life, your Christian life, your spiritual life is going to have ups and downs. Don't let him know that, Screwtape says. Depending on the kind of personality or temperament he has, you're going to push different things on him, or suggest different things. So if he's somebody who's the despairing type, somebody who has a kind of a pessimistic outlook, have him try to get back his faith and get back his energy by sheer willpower. Now, if the guy had experienced Christians around him, they would tell him how ill-advised that was. But it's not too difficult to keep him away from experienced Christians nowadays, Screwtape says. It shows you, by the way, as an aside, how important it is that you have people around you who really are experienced Christians and really have led a faith life over a long period of time. They can direct you in all sorts of ways that you wouldn't necessarily figure out on your own, especially for this guy who is a recent convert. Anyway, if he's the despairing sort, have him try to recover his feelings by sheer willpower. If, on the other hand, he's more on the optimistic side, more the wishful thinking, get him to accept this low point in his faith as normal. Get him to accept what Screwtape describes as a moderated religion, which is as good as no religion at all. Many readers, I think, are puzzled by that expression because they're so used to this maxim of life, moderation in everything, that when they look at moderated religion, it seems good to them. Well, shouldn't you have moderation in everything? Go back to the letter on pacifism and patriotism, that all extremes are being encouraged from a devil's point of view, except extreme devotion to the enemy. And we invert that, we turn that into Christian language. The fact is we are supposed to be devoted to God in an extreme way. Not an extreme way, extreme violence, setting up our own commune somehow in the middle of the woods, but certainly extreme that we love God with our whole heart, our whole soul, our whole strength. That is an extreme. That is not moderated. That you have this total commitment of your mind and your heart to Christ and to God. That is not moderated. And a moderated religion, this is what Lewis is insinuating through Screwtape, would be something in which our whole heart, our whole soul, our whole strength is not committed. They are not committed to Christ. That Christ is maybe number 3, number 4, number 5, but he's not number 1. And that's what Screwtape is expressing here. Get him to think that this trough is permanent and that the enthusiasm that he had for his faith was just a phase. This is something that, especially when you're younger, you go through so many phases, things that you're excited about when you're 12 and embarrassed to admit that you liked when you were 13, things that you were ecstatic about at 15, and then are totally bored by at 16. Get him to think that his faith life is like that somehow embracing the faith was wonderful, but that was then and this is now. Lewis uses this term, the historical point of view, which we will elaborate a little bit more in a future letter where he spends more time on it. But suffice to say for this letter, it's the idea that where you're at now in the present is, by that fact, superior to everything that came before it. So the very fact that you are older, the very fact that you have a new opinion, that it's good or better simply by the case that it's newer or more recent and that you're older. And it's not tested by some kind of correspondence actually with reality. But we will develop that in a further letter. In the next letter, we're going to look at some new friends that the patient has made, friends who, it turns out, are not going to be helpful for his Christian life. And we'll look at what it is that Screwtape recommends to take full advantage, for Wormwood to take full advantage of these new acquaintances.